Hello. Can someone acknowledge me if I'm audible properly?
Yes, Akshaya, you're audible.
Good afternoon, everyone present here. I welcome you all to this session on solving real-life problems using artificial intelligence and signal processing by Dr. Anubha Gupta. Artificial intelligence has been visualized as the science of building computational models that exhibit intelligent problem solving, behavior, and signal processing can be termed as a science of playing or manipulating numeric signals to extract meaningful information out of input signal. In recent times, these have been vast advancements in signal processing field, and one such cause of it is artificial intelligence. So, want to know more about artificial intelligence and signal processing? This session will help us understand how signal processing and artificial intelligence is used to solve real life problems. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Anubha Gupta. She received her PhD from IIT Delhi in electrical engineering. She did her second master's from University of Maryland, USA. She worked as an assistant director with Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. Now she is currently working as a professor at IIIT Delhi. I would like Dr. Anubha Gupta ma'am to take over and start the session. I request all the members of audience to mute their mic and put their queries in the chat box. All the queries will be answered at the end of session. Thank you. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Akshaya, and thank you so much to the student branch for inviting me to this session. So, Akshaya, if you permit, because the gathering is small, then maybe we can take questions in the middle also. Will
Yes,
that
ma'am.
be okay?
Yes, ma'am, that can be okay.
Okay. So perfect. So hello everyone. So in case you want to ask any question in the middle, just stop me and you can also ask me a question because I see we are only hardly 13 people. So so that's a small gathering. I have prepared my talk. Let me present my screen. So I have prepared my talk around the problems that we are solving using AI, ML, uh, uh, in biomedical areas. So it's a brief outline of what all we have been doing and where all we are using AI, ML, or signal processing. But you can stop me anywhere in the middle if you want to know more details. Okay. So I begin. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I can't see the chat window, so someone needs to either give the questions to me or maybe you can unmute yourself. I don't mind if you ask a question in the middle. So this is about the problems that we have been solving in my lab. It is Signal Processing and Biomedical Imaging Lab at IIIT Delhi. So currently, the research work that we have been doing in the lab is on cancer imaging, particularly in microscopic medical image analysis, and we have been working in blood cancers. We have worked on two types of blood cancers, B-ALL, that is acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and multiple myeloma. Both are white blood cell cancers, and this work is going on with AIMS. Then we are also working in cancer genomics, again in blood cancer, that is multiple myeloma, where we are doing the genomic sequence analysis. And again, interestingly, although these are genomic data, so I don't know if some of you have read it in bio or have been working on it. So generally, the genome sequence is made up of 4 nucleotides. We say AGCT sequence. Now a good amount of signal processing and machine learning is being employed in this area. And two of my PhD students are now working in this area, and one is about to graduate also. So it's an interesting area, upcoming area, and has a lot of potential because globally there is a lot of money, finance, etc., in particularly in biomedical areas. Then we have also been working on cancer survival analysis. Again, you will see, I'll show you some examples that we have completed recently that it again amounts to signal processing, AI, ML. Then we have also been working with, so all the above 3 bullets that we have been doing, we have been working with AIIMS, the laboratory oncology unit of AIIMS. Then we are also working with the GB Pant hospital, that is JIPMER. And this is again, this time we are working here with in ECG signal processing, that is on cardiovascular disorders. And again, we are using AI ML signal processing here. My students are also working in EEG. We have recently completed one work in MEG also in collaboration with EPFL. Then we have also collected our own data of people suffering with intellectual development disorder, and we have analyzed their signals also. One of my student is currently, PhD student is working in diffusion tensor imaging. One student also graduated in functional MRI. Then some of the work that is also happening is in signal processing for communication engineering. Again, communication engineering now upcoming area is all AI MLDL, which is being applied in this area. Research in education, yes, little bit we are doing, and again, lots of ML applications are emerging in this area. So this is a small research group of my PhD students, but a lot of BTech and MTech students have also contributed in all these years in my lab and are still continuing to work with us. So a brief list of collaborators, definitely many more I have worked with in the past or in the recent past, but this is a small list of people that I have been working currently with whom the work is going on. So the first work that I am presenting is on cancer survival analysis, and we have recently published 2 works. So I'll first present in brief the first work, that is on cancer risk staging calculator. So I think we know that if a person suffers with cancer, at times it is said that if the person is diagnosed early, then the survival chances would be more. So we associate a term which we call it as the overall survival. That is the day from which the cancer is diagnosed until the person dies. That duration is called as the overall survival. Now, it's very important to be able to predict the risk stage or the cancer stage of the person. So here we used very simple parameters. That is, if you look at the parameters that we have used are age, hemoglobin, calcium, beta-2m, albumin, and EGFR ratio. So EGFR tells about the kidney functioning. We used only these 6 parameters, and we utilized 2 different data sets. One data set was collected and prepared at AIIMS, and another data set which is of Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. So this is an American data set. So it is publicly available. So we utilized these 2 data sets, and we prepared our own risk staging calculator using just 6 parameters. And these are easy to acquire parameters, that is, doesn't use any of the genetic features. So if you look at the work, so this is the entire processing pipeline that we built it on AIIMS data and validated on MMRF data. So if you see that we collected these 6 parameters, so many a times we have some of the parameter values are missing in some patients. Maybe he didn't get the EGFR tested and we have only 5 parameters. So this particular problem is called as the problem of missing values, and there are now a lot of methods of imputing missing values. So in our lab also we have developed our own in-house signal processing based methods of missing value imputation, and so people have also applied autoencoder style of methods of doing missing value imputation. So we first imputed the missing values, had the train test split of the data, we also found the thresholds about which like below which or above which we can say that this is the normal range of this parameter and this goes as the abnormal range of the parameter. And then we assigned some scores to each of the parameters, that is, gave weightage to some parameter, more weightage to some parameters, less weightage to some other parameters using Cox hazard proportional analysis. So this is a sort of a regression framework, but is used in survival analysis. In the linear regression, we have y is equal to alpha 1 x1 plus alpha 2 x2 and so on. But here it is actually y is equal to e raised to the power minus of then weighted linear combination. So, but it's exponentiated. So we computed the adjacency matrix, then did the clustering of the data. And based on the clustering of the data, we could see that 3 clusters are emerging. So then we looked at the survival curves of these 3 groups, which are shown here. And based on this, we assigned them the ground truth labels, and then also trained a decision tree so that, because clustering you can do only of the entire data at one stretch, but you can't, if a new subject comes, you can't predict what would be the label for the new subject. So you need the rules. So on this unsupervised, so this is clustering is unsupervised without any label, but based on this, we allocated the ground truth labels to the data samples. And then we used a decision tree to actually figure out the rules where these labels, which were based on the clustering, were assigned to these patients. And then the decision tree was trained in a supervised manner. And finally, we got the rules based on which we can now assign a risk stage to a new patient. So this is the calculator. This is online at our website of SBI Lab. And you can see that these are the rules. Now, what is also important that we need to always keep in mind, at least I pay close attention to, is that whenever we are taking problems in biomedical areas, and we work in close contact with the doctors, because, for example, here we came up with there are so many decision tree classifiers, and we could use anyone. So, but we had to go back and forth with the doctor and inquire that whatever rules we are getting, do the rules make sense to you in a medical sense? So once she approved one of the decision trees, yes, this time whatever rules are coming, they really make sense. And that's where we actually stopped and we said, okay, fine, these are finally the rules with which we are going to give the assignment. So, the work is interesting, and we can see that now any patient can just go to our website and just put the parameters here in the calculator, and then it actually gives a risk stage. 1 means low risk, 2 means medium risk, and 3 means high risk. So even the doctors can utilize this sort of a tool. But this is particularly developed for multiple myeloma, which is a type of white blood cancer. As I already said, it is actually happens because of the plasma cells in the blood. Then we came up with an improved version in the sense that this particular MRS, or the modified risk staging, we devised if we don't have the genetic features available. But if we have these genetic features, then we devised another risk staging, and this was the improvised version of the previous one. So it used all the 6 parameters as well as high risk cytogenic genetic abnormalities. So this calculator is much better than the previous MRS, that is our previous one, as well as the existing standards. So the existing standard in this area is RISS. So MRS was equivalent to RISS, which actually uses the genetic features. So we also utilize this time genetic features. But what is the key point here in this particular work? That this time we also looked at the different thresholds for the normal and the abnormal range of these parameters like hemoglobin, calcium, beta-2M based on the ethnicity. And to our surprise, we found that the American population had different thresholds, whereas Indian population had different thresholds. So ISS or revised ISS, so these are the calculators which have been built actually looking at the American population. So in general, whatever are the normal or the abnormal ranges, they have been quoted based on the American population or the Caucasian in general population. Whereas our Indian population, we realize that the thresholds are slightly different. So we should be actually coming up with a different calculator. So, or in other words, based on the ethnicity, we should devise it. So this time we devised, again, pipeline is sort of similar, but this time we tried to build 3 different adjacency graphs and made the consensus of them, and then build the calculator and also use the genetic features. So this worked much, much better than the previous calculator. Reason being, one, that we used different thresholds for different ethnicity. 2, we were also using high-risk cytogenetic abnormalities. And 3, we also improvised on our pipeline in the sense that when we were doing clustering earlier, we were using only one type of clustering, but here we utilized 3 different clusterings and then took the consensus of them and then finally gave the labels to the patients. So this again, so this the work has been accepted only 1 week back. And so this calculator will again be put on our website. But if one wants to, one doesn't have the cytogenetic, then the previous calculator MRS really does a wonderful job. So the next set of work that we have been doing using signal processing AI/ML. So just a brief gist of that. So we have been also working in cardiac disorders. So these are largely my BTech and MTech students who have worked on this. So the first work is that this work is under review as of now. So this, we built a explainable AI decision model for ECG data of cardiac disorders. And we utilize 2 public data sets. One is PTB-XL dataset, which is of more than 20,000 patients, and it's a very rich data set publicly available. If any one of you is interested, you should definitely go for it and utilize the data set. So this has largely 5 superclasses, which are conduction disturbance, hypertrophy, myocardial infarction, etc. And then there is another data set, arrhythmia data set. So interestingly, so just 1 year back, so it so happened that we started working with GB Pant Hospital, and there the doctor, Professor Mohit Gupta, he is a professor of cardiology, and he wanted us to use AI, ML, etc. in ECG data analysis. So we did a lot of work actually. We also collected data of post-COVID patients. We also collected data of healthcare workers. So I'll come to that work later. But in the process, I realized that the way we analyze generally, this is how I saw the literature to be doing the job, that either people were using extracting heart rate variability related features. So there are toolboxes that extract heart rate variability features, which we call as the HRV features. So that's one way, and apply the traditional machine learning methods of maybe support vector machine, etc. There is another type of work which is now emerging in this area, which is you feed the entire ECG waveforms of maybe 12 channels or so into a CNN type of deep learning architecture, so which is convolutional neural network architecture. So, so we saw that people are either doing analysis using those HRV features, or they're doing analysis on the ECG waveforms. But finally, so many variants of ECG, CNN models are there, and they're doing the analysis. Here also people are doing the analysis. But then how do I figure out which model is really doing a good job. Is it really doing a good job or not? So maybe let's say there is a classifier that says that gives an accuracy of, let's say, 93%, and another is also giving me an accuracy of 93.2%. How do I know whether both are equivalent, or one is doing a better job or another is doing a better job? So we thought that no, we should actually have some interpretability on whatever we are inferring out, so that we can figure out which model is doing a better job. Now, these days, there is a lot of emphasis on explainable AI, or it's also called as the interpretable artificial intelligence, interpretable AI, where people are interested in knowing what actually has been seen in the data, based on which your model, your classifier is really giving you a decision, so that you can explain that decision to a doctor that, hey, this is what has been seen in the data, and this is how it's working in. So some methods are already out there, for example, GradCam, GradCam++, SHAP, Lime, etc., which are being used by largely people in computer vision community to figure out what is there in the data. So here, so these are two different types of, and so another insight that we had was that sometimes, so I asked with the doctor that, how do you see that, what is a disorder, cardiac disorder? So they say that no, sometimes it is actually visible in the waveform when there is a change in the waveform. So for us, the waveforms are also important. So if we go for a machine learning model that is using only HRV related features, then we cannot have that sort of interpretability on the waveform. We can only have heart rate variability sort of a thing. So then that implies that a CNN type of a model that takes in raw waveforms, and somehow if we are able to show what has been seen in the input waves, then that does the job. But there are another types of disorders. So if you look at the PTBXL sort of myocardial infarction, STT changes, these changes are more visible in the ECG waveforms that a doctor sees. But there is another type of disorder, for example, arrhythmia. Arrhythmia means that there is a heart rate variability. Now, this is not visible in the waveform. The shape of the waveform doesn't change, but this time the heart rate variability sort of a thing changes. So if we are working with this raw ECG waveforms, then arrhythmia sort of interpretability on arrhythmia sort of a thing is difficult. But if we are only using HRV sort of thing, then we can't show the changes in the waveform that a person is seeing, the doctor is seeing. So that means somewhere both the things are important. So let us see first. So this is a standard ECG wave, and it consists of PQRST U. We also say that PQRST wave. U wave is sometimes not visible, not always visible, but yes, U wave is also an important component. Many a times it is also visible. But the standard which is said is called as a PQRST wave. So we built our own CNN model on PTBXL dataset, and we also validated results on arrhythmia dataset. But these were some of the results on the PTBXL dataset, and they were really interesting. That when we put the interpretability on the input waves, what our proposed classifier is seeing, is it really making sense or not? So see, this is a normal lead, V2 lead data of the ECG of a healthy person. It looks like this. So this was particularly of a disorder which is called as a right bundle branch block. And here there is an M wave emerges in the lead V2. And what is an M wave? That along with the R peak, there is another small R peak that appears actually. So if you look at, this is the data which is actually from one of the patient of the PTBXL who is having this disorder, right bundle branch block. And we ran the interpretability analysis, and once the patient was correctly classified, the interpretability put the highlights on the portion of the wave which it felt was the reason for it to be classified into its respective class. So the red color shows that here the emphasis was higher. So when we looked at this, for example, this particular portion is highlighted here. You can see indeed it has been able to put the marker, the red color, on the two successive R peaks, which are actually what happens in a subject who is suffering with this. So this middle portion has been captured from the net, that this is how, where like some people show that this is how the M wave looks like, and this is the abnormality. And this is what our model showed. Indeed, it was able to pick and also put highlighter on the respective M wave. And that's how now the doctor says, okay, hey, I can rely on the results. Indeed, the model is working good. So this is another example that I'm showing. We did it for many patients, and the doctor was really super happy that yes, indeed, it's doing a great job. So see, this is another, and this is inferior myocardial infarction. And this time there is a prominent Q wave which is highlighted in lead 3 and AVF leads. So this is a 12 lead data. So this is lead 3. So these are different names of the leads where they are positioned on the human body. And prominent Q wave occurs in lead 3 and AVF. They look somewhat like this. So if you look at this waveform and look at this waveform, there is a slight distortion that has happened here. Similarly, in AVF also, this distortion has happened. And see, this model was also able to pick up exactly these regions where these changes are actually happening. So again, it verified, it sort of gave us the confidence that yes, we have been able to capture it properly. So another work that we have done is has been accepted recently, again, last week only. We collected a lot of data of healthcare workers, that is doctors, nurses, who are actually giving care to the COVID-19 patients. So we collected data from number of hospitals, Ranchi, Jharkhand, GB Pant Institute of this JIPMER that I'm saying, GB Pant Hospital, then Rajiv Gandhi Super Speciality Hospital. So lots of places we collected this data. And so we wanted to see that how these people who are giving care to the COVID patients, how they get affected because of the workload, or because of the fact that they are also suffering with the fear that they may catch the disease, or they may transfer the disease to their family people, or maybe they are just overworked. So we collected their data, ECG data, as well as we also asked them to fill up the questionnaire, which is called as a mini-Z questionnaire. So this mini-Z questionnaire is used to figure out whether a person is satisfied with whatever he or she is doing, whether the person is feeling stressed, or whether the person is feeling burnout. So interesting findings were there. Again, we used both signal processing, ML models, etc. So the data was, this is healthcare workers. The data was collected of about 1,600 odd people, all doctors and nurses, and mini-Z questionnaire as well as ECG data was collected. So around 16% people stated that they felt burnout, whereas rest of them were sort of healthy, or you can say satisfied. They were satisfied with whatever. So interestingly, we found that the second line healthcare workers, not the front line, that is who are coming directly in contact with maybe the doctors, but the second line healthcare workers who are giving care in these hospitals, they were more burnt out, and they had more impact as compared to the frontline workers. So people who were stressed, we wanted to see whether their ECG waves can now also detect whether they are stressed or whether they are satisfied. So interestingly, we found that if we just put those labels based on the questionnaire that these guys are stressed and these guys are actually healthy, our machine learning model could also infer that yes, people were stressed. It was a very good accuracy on them, and yes, they were burnt out. So we used the HRV data here. We also use some demographic features. So if you look at this, this was again the interpretability analysis using the SHAP. So for example, not only the ECG waves were there, but also HRV features like NNI, so which were extracted from ECG, as well as some other features like mental well-being. So demographic data, joint family, whether they were part of joint family or nuclear family, their age, duty hours per week. So all these we utilized and we built different classifiers, and you can see that most of the classifiers, particularly extra-T, cat boost and gradient boosting, the accuracies are really high. So that showed that their ECG waves are also having changes. Now, this is an important finding because if their ECG waves, using their ECG waves, we are able to see, yes, they are stressed or burnout. So that implies in the longer run, maybe if they continue to stay in that state, they may develop some serious heart disorders. So in a way, it is again a very good example of where AI ML can be used. So we are trying now to build an app where people can feed their signal ECG wave and then figure out whether they are stressed or healthy, so that maybe there can be better ways of putting, or people can take informed decisions on how to give the duties or allocate duties during such pandemics. So again, a very good example of a real life problem. So how to help these people. So then some of the work that is also happening is in neuroscience area. So we collected data of people suffering with intellectual and developmental disorder. And so we collected this EEG data while the subjects were under rest. And also we played some music and then also collected their data. So the data was, this data was collected using a headset, which is the Emotiv Epoch Plus headset. So this is not a very expensive one, but is sort of the signal that is received is not very good in signal to noise ratio. It has slightly inferior signal to noise ratio. So one needs to do a good pre-processing of the data. So we built our own pre-processing pipeline. We have also released the data set. So this data set is freely available at Mendeley. You can visit my lab page and then also see that. So this paper also mentions the link of the site where the data set is available. We collected data of about 14 subjects, 7 healthy and 7 people who were suffering with this IDD disorder. And the data was collected under the care of these Krishna and Blessing. They were actually special educators and people who at Tamanna NGO schools and where the Nai Disha Center, where the data was collected. So this is Nai Disha Center, Tamanna NGO. So it was collected under their care. And so, again, this is sort of that we wanted to see whether the brain networks are slightly altered of the people who are suffering with IDD. So the idea was that maybe we can devise some methodologies of neurorehabilitation. That is, if we know that their brain networks are altered, can we devise some interventions techniques that can be sort of given? So sort of some exercises, some playthings, or some things that actually take care of whatever abnormality is emerging. Can such things be devised and then administered, or we call them as intervention, so that they can be helped? Because we know that brain exhibits neuroplasticity, that if one portion of the brain is not doing a good job, another maybe, or you can maybe train the brain in some fashion. although the work, we didn't pursue the work afterwards due to various reasons, but it's again a very interesting area if anyone wants to apply this signal processing AI/ML methods. They can really work in this area, and you can really do wonders and help a lot to people. So the data set is available. Along with that, we also release this pre-processing pipeline, because this is what we figured out while working with the EEG data, that this data actually requires a very strong pre-processing. Unless that pre-processing or the cleaning of the data is not done properly with filtering, etc., you may not get the desired outputs, that because the SNR is generally poor, subjects may also move a bit, and the particularly this emotive epoch plus, the sensors are not pasted on the head, but they are dry sensors, so they even move. So that is why it's important that one needs to do a very careful pre-processing. So this is a completely automated pipeline. You can also download the pipeline and utilize with the emotive epoch plus if you're using any of these data. So we analyzed their brain network. So this has also been published in November 2020 in IEEE Transaction. And this is the schematic view of what all we did. We did modularity versus link density analysis, inter and intra-hemisphere brain hemisphere connectivity analysis, functional connectivity analysis, and so on. We also devised our own permutation testing framework, that is the statistical analysis framework, because the data is of very small number of subjects. Now, this is a very key point that I would like to emphasize. So generally, when we do machine learning based, so there are three ways that we can do the analysis. One is the conventional signal processing based methods, that you just extract some features, or based on the Fourier description or something, you say that these are the characteristic features I find in this particular disorder or in this particular case. So in a way, now those are the markers. Sometimes we also call as the biomarkers if they are being used in the biomedical areas. So those are the key biomarkers, provided they are not they're visible in only one of your class of subjects, and they're not visible in the other class of subjects. Now here, then you don't require a lot of patient's data. You can just show that indeed it is happening, and over time people figure out, yes, indeed that happens. So these are the tested biomarkers. So based on signal processing, then you can say, okay, Fourier description, Fourier based method analysis. For example, in brain, we say talk about alpha, beta, gamma rhythms, brain rhythms. So these are nothing but the data corresponding to different frequency bands, and there are when it's an auditory stimulus, that is something is sung or something is spoken, then different response is seen. If person is sleeping, different response is seen. So there are some things that become known over a period of time. Another way to do the analysis of the data is using devising machine learning and deep learning based methods. Now we do this sort of analysis also, but now we require a larger number of data, larger number of patients' data or subjects' data. So generally, we say that when you're doing training and then doing the validation on another data set, so the data should be split based on the subjects. That is, the subject who is seen in the training data, that subject's data should not be present in the test data, and vice versa. Now, this is important because whether it is ECG, EEG, or any of these biomedical signal analysis, over time, now people are showing that these also act as your fingerprint sort of a thing. That is, they do carry subject information. And that is why it's important that the data is split at the subject level. But when we employ machine learning, deep learning, we really require a large amount of subjects data. If the data is not of very large number of subjects, if it is traditional machine learning, we'll be using cross-fold validation. If it is deep learning, then maybe we are doing sort of some transfer learning sort of a scenario where there is an architecture that is already trained on a bigger data. Now only few layers are tweaked here with the small data. That's one way. But still, the moment it is machine learning, then it becomes data hungry, in the sense that you require a large subjects data. Only then you can sort of establish the validity. Now, if you look at this work, we had only 7 plus 7 subjects data, 14 subjects data. Then how to do the validation? So there is statistical ways of doing the analysis, and permutation testing framework is one of the very interesting framework. We devised this for this particular sort of EEG analysis where we were doing. So we devised our own strategy of doing permutation testing. So here we did the shuffling of the patient. So how many times shuffling of the two groups? 1,000 times. So in a way, now we generated a histogram, and we said that our observed, whatever groups we had, they just generated one single value, which is here. But when we did the shuffling of the patients across the groups, it generated a whole list of 1,000 times, then it generated 1,000 values. And if our observed statistic or our observed value is lying in the tail, where the p-value, we say that the probability in the tail is less than equal to 0.05, then that means it is very different from this entire population's data, and hence it is statistically significant. So although we had only 14 subjects data, 7 plus 7, but if you see, then this histogram, in a way, it is generated of 1,001 values are being generated and have been tested. So now it is like establishing the statistical significance, and which is an interesting paradigm, that you can, even if the data is very small, you can devise signal processing methods, use the right statistical test, or devise a methodology to establish that statistical significance, and then you can perhaps validate your findings. So this was all on EEG, although a lot of other work has also been done on EEG in my lab, but let me just stop here for this work. Then we have also worked on cancer microscopic imaging. So this is sort of now, as of now, taking a lot of my time and energy. Since past 6 years, we have been working with the AIIMS in 2 blood cancers, as I said initially, in B lineage, acute lymphoblastic leukemia and multiple myeloma. And we have been trying to build tools that can be actually deployed in any path lab in the country. And so what we have been doing, so traditionally the cancer, while the cancer treatment is going on, so the monitoring is done using advanced techniques like flow cytometry and molecular studies on the bone marrow fluid or the bone marrow aspirate. And we want to build a low-cost AI-enabled cancer detection tool for at least blood cancers, because we have been working in that area. So we collected, so the doctors actually prepared the slides and collected, clicked the photographs of those slides. And you can see that there are a lot of challenges in this data analysis. So the aim is that using these microscopic images that have been captured from the slides, we should be able to first segment these cells out. So these are the cells where my cursor is. And once we have segmented the cells, then we would like to classify them, whether they are healthy or whether they are cancer cells. So if you see that these 3 images, they have been captured from 3 different subjects at different times. We collected the data over 2 years. And we find that if you look at these images carefully, you will find that there is a variation in the background color. So that's one challenge. Second challenge is, if you see, for example, this or this image, the cells are actually clustered together. Now, maybe there is a healthy cell which is clustered with a cancer cell. So that means both the cells need to be clustered out or segmented out. And then you need to take a call on individual cells. That's another challenge in segmentation. Then the third challenge we see is that sometimes if you see where they are actually joining together, the cytoplasm of two are joining together, which is a very thin line. So even the segmentation may not be easy in this case. Or sometimes in some of the images, we also find that the background has similar color as this. That's another challenge. If you see these sorts of cells, these are the cells which are not the cells of interest. So how do they prepare the slides? They put a bone marrow aspirate on the slide, glass slide, then put a chemical over it, which is supposed to bind with your cells of interest. So we call that our cells of interest are getting stained or colored, and rest of the cells are not capturing those colors, which are not the cells of interest. So these are actually the RBCs which are underlying there. And so maybe there is an RBC which goes beneath your cell of interest when the image is captured, and then that means that there will be a different shadow on the cell also, which may alter the decision also. So there are lots of challenges in this work. So we had to do stain color normalization to do away with the different colors that we are seeing, because both segmentation and classification would be actually biased to that. Then do the segmentation and then classification. We also ran 2 medical imaging challenges, and the data sets are available online if any student wants to use those data sets. So we conducted recently in IEEE ISB 2021 conference on the segmentation challenge data set. So the data is also available on IEEE Dataport as well as on Kaggle. The leaderboard is also open. So anyone wants to use this data can use the data and build their own architectures and test on the leaderboard how you're performing. We conducted, so this year challenge that was on segmentation. In 2019, we ran a challenge on classification. So these are 15,000 plus cell images, curated, well curated images. So these are the largest data sets on this, on these blood cancers anywhere worldwide. So these are the largest data sets as of now in the public domain that you can again utilize. So this data set is also available, publicly available, not on the IEEE Dataport or Kaggle. So this is a mistake. So this data set is available at the TCIA, that is the Cancer Imaging Archive. But you can also refer to our lab page where all these is mentioned. So the leaderboard of this is also open. So these are the data sets that have been released by my lab, 4 in the cancer imaging area, and 1 of this Mandalay of EEG data set that we have released. We have also released the codes of at least cancer imaging like stain color variation, cancer versus BLL cancer, normalization, classification. So all these data, the codes have been released. More codes have also been released. You can again refer to the publication page of my lab, SBI lab. So along with the paper, wherever we release the data set, so the link of the, wherever we release the code, the link of the code is also given there. So we have been also working, as I said, in cancer genomics area. So recently we released one pipeline which is of generating. So these are miRNA. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there are RNAs, microRNAs. Their microRNAs are called the key regulators of cellular processes. And many cancers, it is seen that they actually are responsible. So it's very important to figure out detect these microRNAs. So we made our own pipeline, which is actually MIRPipe, which is doing the analysis on the RNA sequencing data. And we wanted to detect novel miRNAs. There are lots of miRNAs that are already known or detected, but there are some which are not detected. So we wanted to detect the novel ones as well as the ones which are here, so that if there is any mutation happening, then one can detect that. So we also prepared a synthetic tool actually, which is called as MIRSIM tool, and this has already been released publicly. available at Zenodo. It generates a synthetic miRNA or piRNA data by altering the nucleotide in their seed region or the region other than the seed. And so it's a very interesting work, but I think that you guys may not be working in genomic area, but I just wanted to show that machine learning, deep learning, everything is being used even in the genomics area. We looked at different pipelines, and we also tested our proposed pipeline and validated using the synthetic data tool that we used, because real data, you don't know what the ground truth is. No one knows what the ground truth is. So whenever we have to validate our pipelines or validate any of the work, at times we also generate the synthetic data which actually mimics that data, but this time the ground truth is known to you, and now you can actually benchmark a lot of different tools or methods, including your own, and then show results on the real data, so that you can say, okay, if our proposed method is working on the synthetic data where the ground truth is known. Now, if we run on the real data, we will assume that it must be doing a fairly good job there as well. So the acknowledgements, I really thank all the students, UG, PG student, research interns, or the collaborators who are working time to time and supporting us in our lab. We have also got fundings from DST, MIT, and we are also thankful to some of the centers which are there in IIIT Delhi, including Infosys Center for AI and Center of Excellence in Healthcare. IBM support was our technical co-sponsor in the IEEE SB 2019 challenge, and Springer helped us publish our challenge proceedings. So this is all from my side. If there are any questions, I would be happy to take the questions now. Yeah. So are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am, there is a question.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Akshay, do you want to convey it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
How
Go on.
can AI problem solving be implemented on the most basic level for beginners getting into the field?
So Akshaya, I'm still sort of, what do you want to know in this? How a beginner should enter into the area?
Yes, ma'am. That is a question from someone.
Okay. So I would say that if you're a student, get associated with the faculty who is working in the area. So the first thing is that, and this is only a glimpse of what at least we are doing. At least I am working in the area of biomedical, so there's what my students are working on. But this is not all. There is a lot of work which is going on using AI ML, for example, in sentiment analysis, using the data of whatever chat and people put out there. So there are tons of applications now almost everywhere in all walks of life. So one is that get associated, see where your interest lies, which domain excites you more. Second, get associated with the faculty who is working in the area. Every application has its own nuances. You need to definitely know AI ML, and there are lots of very good courses on Coursera. Now there are lots of companies which are also coming up with data science certification programs. For example, IBM, Great Learning, different, or if you look at Coursera also, there's a sequence of courses you need to do so that you earn a certificate. So at least they give you a handle of like what all is there in that area. Then if you start working with a faculty, because they can actually facilitate a lot of things. For example, we have also used PTB Excel data. They're free available data, but still I collaborated with the doctor who could validate us the findings on this free available data, that yes, whatever we are inferring, that is making sense. So that sort of collaboration generally becomes very handy if you're working with the faculty or someone who is in touch with such people, so that, and in that process you learn a huge lot of things, because every application, as I said earlier, has its own nuances and has its own key points that you can understand only when you're working with people like them. Hope I have answered that question.
Yes, ma'am. There is another question. Can you suggest some projects on AI and signal processing we can work on for a BE student?
Yeah, BTech students can work, for example, the ECG work on PTBXL that has been done by my UG students only. And they did a great job. They built a deep learning architecture, and then and the work on EEG also that I showed you, they were also two of my UG students. They started working with me when they were in close to the end of second year. So since then they started working. They only helped in the collection of the data at the Nai Disha Center. So these are all UG students. But again, I would say that there's so many areas, so many problems. You should get associated at your place also. You should get associated with the faculty. If not, then maybe during the summer, apply to faculty in IITs or triple IITs or IISc, etc. And you can see on their websites also what sort of work they are doing. Whatever interests you, apply to the labs in these universities also. You can work. Now with the online thing, now everyone is accustomed to working remotely also. So now you perhaps don't need to even go to a university and only then work there. You can just schedule your discussion with any of the faculty if they're interested, and they will have you. And then you can will get the opportunity to work on a real life problem on AI or signal processing. Because otherwise, in my opinion, at least, I feel students need that sort of guidance initially, but you can look at what all people are doing. For example, in triple IT also, every faculty has a presence in the online space. People have prepared their websites. So for example, I have also prepared my website. So let me again project my screen so that I can show you. So for example, this is my lab page, SBI lab. This is my lab. So everyone has prepared their own lab page, SBI lab at triple-itt.ac.in. So I have prepared my own lab, and then there are like people who all are working in my lab. So there are different pages, the work that we are doing, publications that we have, resources that we have put out. So as I'm saying, this calculator is online, so it is here. Then we have different data set, that challenges that we ran. So likewise, most of the faculty, in at least in my university, they are actually having their own web pages. So you can figure out what all sort of work they are doing, and then get associated with whomsoever you really feel like working. Similar is the case with the IITs. Most of the faculty now have online presence, and you can see what all they're doing. If you are still not very clear about that, look at the faculty name and go to Google Scholar. So I'm typing it. So go to their Google Scholar page, just type the name Google Scholar, and you will be able to go to that Google Scholar page, and you can see their recent publications. Just based on the titles of their publication, you can figure out in which area they are working, and then you can perhaps decide that maybe this is the type of work that I want to do. Approach them. And most of the time, people are really nice, and they are always looking for bright students, hardworking students, and they would be really happy to have you. Some other question, Akshay?
Ma'am, as of now, there are no questions. Guys, if you have any questions, please put up in the chat, or you can raise your hand.
Okay. I have a doubt.
Yes.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Hello, Anubha. I'm Pranav. I really like what you're doing. I really appreciate the effort, and I mean, it's a lot of research actually, obviously, and for people to reach out to this, it has to be converted into some sort of a product. Like, what would you do, like, to help the people? Like, how would this research help people unless it's a product, you can't really
Yeah.
reach
So
out to people.
definitely, Pranav. So as I said, for example, for ECG, we are now making an app, and we are trying. I'll be hosting on my server. So some students are working on that already.
Okay.
For the cancer imaging work, so that's not easy to actually convert to a product because product needs to be validated also. So I'm currently looking for a funding which is a big amount, big chunk of money.
Yeah.
Unless I get that big chunk of money, because we really need to buy a bit costly equipment and also validate what we are finding here and what we are finding there, and also collect data of lots of subjects. So the two data set, we collected data of more than 100 patients, but each of the data set costed us about 2 years of constant work. Now, 4 years we spent in collecting data of around 200 patients. Now, if we really want to validate and put it out, we just can't do that manually so much, right? We
Yeah,
really
correct.
need costly machine, and those machines cost, if we want to collect in an automated fashion, itself cost around 1.5 crore. So that means we really need that sort of money initially so that we can collect a lot of data in lesser amount of time, and then do the validation again with the existing state of the art with which doctors are validating. So I'm just currently looking for the money. If
Yeah.
someone will give us the money, maybe in another 2 years we can come out with something nice for the in the public domain also.
Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah, it was nice listening to you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I hope there are no more questions.
Okay, thank you, Akshaya. Thank you,
Uh,
everyone.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving insights on different biomedical areas which are close in our day-to-day lives and which can be improved with artificial intelligence and machine learning. Thank you so much, ma'am. The session was really informative and it was amazing.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye. Have a good day.
Guys,